So, step into my office, big dog. You want to know what is the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! In a tier list form. Should I give you that? Alright, what's going on with y'all, big dog? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. The new Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta is insane! The more that me, Top Deck TJ, Chat, and other players have been playtesting and going through and analyzing this format, the more insane it is. So I thought that today I would be giving you a tier list on what I think is the most powerful Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks post the Forbidden List, and we're not gonna worry about price. We're gonna see what are the best decks here and what is the best deck for you to be able to win. Meta changers are the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! They are tier 1 Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, but we have to build other decks around these particular decks because of their power. Krispy Kreme Hot and Ready are some powerful Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. They can go toe-to-toe with some of the meta changer decks and are doing their own thing. They're really, really good. You should look out for it. A lot of effort isn't necessarily a bad Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. It's just going to require a lot of time, a lot of care, a lot of attention, and a big brain chungus Yu-Gi-Oh! Player to be able to master. And then everybody's favorite, oh no, what are you doing, baby? Go ahead and touch grass instead of playing these decks. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in and see what I think about these decks. So you're probably wondering what exactly will be the criteria we are going to be using for this tier list, and all I gotta do is say, come here, come here. Criteria these nuts. Me and your mama got some things going on right now. Why you need to know about the criteria? Currently, we don't have any events post the February 13, 2023 Forbidden List, but there are some cards that we should be watching out for. One is namely all of the hand traps that are probably going to be reintroduced back into the format. Hand traps are extremely good again in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because two of the decks that just basically say, two hand traps are now nerfed, giving way to some other decks that could be susceptible. Another thing that I think the initial format will be revolved around is, can you play around the new meta changer Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck? And for the first time in a long time, it's not tier limits. Hands down, everyone is looking towards Kashtira and what exactly it's going to be doing inside of the format. It's the reason why cards like Nibiru the Primal being an Ash Blossom are going to be coveted right now. And also, this deck by itself has some problems or can present some problems for a lot of particular decks. With that in mind, let's go ahead and build this tier list in accordance to that. Let's go ahead and start off with Abyss Actors. This deck actually got some pretty cool support from the new set. It got some cards that allowed it to be a lot more consistent, and still players don't understand what Abyss Actor does. The problem with Abyss Actors is that it doesn't do enough. Unfortunately, I would put it in the touch grass. Keep in mind, this particular tier list is a meta tier list. We want these decks to be as competitive as possible, and that's what we're ranking them on. This against a Kashtira matchup, even when your opponent doesn't know what they're doing, you're still at an uphill battle. A really good example is that you get to see a prolonged game of Kashtira versus Abyss Actors in an archetype analysis. You can almost say that it was an analysis on both of those decks. Overall, I think when it comes to meta contention, you might want to Abyss Act your way into a better deck, but I don't think it's a terrible deck. It's a really, really good budget Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. Next is the Albaz strategy. This deck got some insane support from Photon Hypernova, and players are wondering how exactly it would be able to adapt, especially with cards like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring in the format. Well, my friends, welcome to the theater. I genuinely think right now, this is a Krispy Kreme Hot and Ready Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. The Bestial monsters do take a little bit of a backseat because Kashtira doesn't care about its graveyard, but that's fine because the Bestial monsters are amazing for the Despia strategy, being able to banish your own graveyard. Being able to use Reinbrum to return Big Daddy Arise Heart and not caring about your monsters or your cards being banished as much, and then also being able to outshine Ira, Shank, Death Star IRS by banishing it with Mirror Jade instead of forcing a destruct. This deck is actually ready to be able to take on some of the top contending decks. Dark World, my friends, how do you guys want me to tell you? It's a very fun budget deck, but unfortunately, within the span of a few months, this deck is power crept. Dark World seemingly just doesn't do enough right now in a Yu-Gi-Oh card game where every single one of your cards need to be able to do multiple functions. Dinos, my boys. Where exactly would I rate Dinos? Now, I did a lot of testing with this deck, and I think that this deck is absolutely slept on. The reason why I would put Dinos in the slept on category is because resolving a True King of Lethal Sagam literally is a free W, and people just don't respect it. Overall, Dino still is in pretty much the exact same spot, but right now, being able to disrupt your opponent's extra deck and figure out what they're playing to be able to make your ultimate board is probably what you need to do best. Moving on to Draco Slayers, this deck actually did get worse because of Kashtira and hand traps. I would put it simply in a lot of effort. The biggest thing is that Kashtira can lock out zones, and unfortunately the pendulum zones being zones that could be locked out could prevent you from playing Yu-Gi-Oh once your opponent figures out what you're playing. And the exact same problems exist with Endymion as it would with Draco Slayer. It's a deck that does take a lot of effort to maybe even touch grass. The only reason why I would put it in the touch grass category is because this deck is insanely power crept. Endymion wasn't hit on the forbidden list because it was some ultra overly powerful Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It was hit to start a new era. And outside of Beyond the Pendulum, Endymion didn't necessarily get any new support. I would say that it's probably in a lot of effort / go touch grass, though I do know Draco Slayers are a fairly good deck in the Darkwing Blast format. I'd probably pick this deck over the Endymion Unproven, unless you're a big Endymion fan. Been going for a while, probably out to go get milk. Unproven, just got off the ban list, also known as jail. This might be my dad. Now, I'm not going to cap with you guys. It is the beginning of the format, so allow me to have my copium takes. And if you guys have any copium takes, let me know down below in the comment section. What decks do you think are going to be extremely powerful? I'm going to go ahead and give a nod to Evil Eye. Now, the biggest problem with Evil Eye in the past was it wasn't necessarily consistent enough to be able to make huge plays. Not only does the new Photon Hypernova set give it the consistency that it needs, Evil Eye can summon a monster that is indestructible by battle, can't be targeted or destroyed by card effects. It also gains a ton of utility when you use engine cards like Kashtira monsters or even the Bistio monsters if Tearlament is still present, to be able to help disrupt the board and facilitate its own plays. Triple Tactics Tasking is also a card that can be used to gain cards like Tactics Change of Heart and Mind Control to be able to take your opponent's bish and facilitate your plays. I genuinely think that Evil Eye is ridiculously slept on, and at the very worst, it just might be a top budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Fluundereese losing Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. I mean, to be honest, I already think that this deck was already on its way out. Not only that, with tier limits being hit, Dimension Shifter isn't as powerful as it once was. Looking at the Kashtira format, I mean, I don't think I Dimension Shifter that deck, my friend. Fun fact, Penguins will hump anything. Anything. Even evacuated penguins that have already moved to Penguin Heaven. Now, call me Hopium, but Galaxy Eyes actually has solid Yu-Gi-Oh combos to end on an Abiru token. All right, that's not the initial thought, but allow me to give you my copium take about this deck. This deck draws so many similarities to Black Wings from Darkwing Blast. Black Wings were an afterthought Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but with the support that it got, it became insane. And I think Photons actually have that exact type of feeling with the new cards that it got. I'm not saying that Galaxy Eyes will top or win a YCS, but if you guys remember that Darkwing Blast format where Black Wings were actually doing some damage and representing, I think that very much could happen for the Galaxy archetype inside of Photon Hypernova, and it's actually really nice to see Konami give meaningful support to these type of character decks. Generators also got some really good support to end up on an Nibiru token, but the reason why I think generators are a little bit weaker is because you're going to end up on a Nibiru token on your opponent's turn. Unfortunately, the generator field spell allows you to summon 5 monsters to your side of the field, which will then immediately be responded with a Nibiru and a Primal Being, and also this deck's biggest choke point is still its field spell. As a budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck, I think that this deck is powerful, but it does have a lot to prove when you look at some of the other proven decks that are just extremely good right now. Except for my Copium Take Galaxy Eyes. Don't look at that one. Yugioh losing Sprite Elf is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen to a deck that did not deserve it. Unfortunately, Sprite Elf wasn't hit because of Sprite, or at least I wouldn't like to think so. I like to think that Sprite was hit because of Tearlament and all of the interactions that it allowed Tearlament to do to play further. That does take a huge hit on this deck, but I think that it's still extremely slept on. Yugioh's actually had the opportunity to be a meta changer Yu-Gi-Oh deck with Sprite Elf. Fortunately enough, the Bujin Link monster of Bujin, you guys know I can't say cards, does help pick up the slack for this deck and still allows it to be in powerful contention. Gold Pride is something that I've always known TJ for, though I thought that he normally celebrated only in June. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is where would I put this? I'm going to say that it's slept on. But anyways, the reason why I put Gold Pride so high is because of the Punk strategy. Punk is a deck that I've always regarded fairly highly, and now that we're moving more towards hand traps, that can be really good for that particular deck. The Gold Pride cards actually give it an extra additional spice layer to it, allowing you to extend and make some really cool plays. You guys are not ready for Labyrinth Mommy Milkers to take over the Yu-Gi-Oh meta. I'm not 100% sure. I think one of the biggest problems, or two of the biggest problems for Labyrinth, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring on your Welcome Labyrinths, that is like the worst filling ever and sets you so far behind. But more importantly, a Kashtira player locking out your spell and trap card zones, that can also be a problem. Though I do think Labyrinth players can help combat this by playing cards like Lava Golem, Evenly Matched, and maybe even Winged Dragon or Raw Sphere mode. I think that this deck is more in a slept-on category as opposed to an already established hot and ready Krispy Kreme donut mommy milkers. You are 1000% sleeping on Math Mech and all of the cyber strategies. If we're going to say hand traps are fairly good, jam packing your deck with a yes amount of hand traps to stop the opponent and then praying that they don't Nibiru you. Other than that, you're pretty much really good with the Math Mech deck. And the same thing goes to Marine Set strategies. And though I do think Marine Sets and Math Mech have their differences, one thing that they do share in common is that they can play a ton of hand traps and they make really good one-card link boards. One thing that you will have to watch out for is Kashtira locking out all of your zones. You're going to kind of need those, but I have a strong feeling you can play enough cards to be able to counter that. Now, Makanko. Oh my God, guys. Makanko. Makanko is a Krispy Kreme and hot and I literally can't even say this. I can't believe it. If you guys have not seen Warrior Libromancer Makanko, that deck is insane. It genuinely eats hand traps like no other, has responses to Kashtira. Really watch out for this Yu-Gi-Oh deck, guys. This might be an up-and-coming surging Yu-Gi-Oh deck in the top tables. The loss of both the Ishizu cards and Tearlament to the format has me questioning about Naturia and how viable it can be. I do think that the deck does require a ton of effort right now, and that's strictly because finding its footing into the format to be able to go against some of the better decks in Yu-Gi-Oh will be a little bit of a problem, though I think players can really establish that soon, and it can easily move to a slept-on and hot and ready Krispy Kreme type strategy. Ninjas are way better than what a lot of players give it credit. I'm going to actually say that a lot of effort is just a lot to prove, because that would actually be a better analysis on what these decks have to say about themselves. Ninjas are literally an afterthought Yu-Gi-Oh strategy that no one even pays attention to. This deck actually does get a lot of support from the Photon Hypernova set to actually make it a legitimate strategy that could compete. Though the big problem with Ninja is that it doesn't seemingly make a really big board, but that actually can play into your advantage with cards like Nibiru and Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring being able to stop big combo choke points. Plunder Patrol, if I'm gonna give Plunder Patrol something, I think its biggest weakness would be consistency depending on your build. But Plunder Patrol pretty much has everything going for it to be able to counter a deck like Kashtira. Plunder Patrol can naturally play a few cards that unlock your zones. First is Kaiju's. Just tributing off the Kashtira Shinged Ira brings you back into the game, but also the Adventure Engine is also extremely good at being able to activate it, get your cards to the side of the field, get you your Draco back, and bounce the Ira. Doing all this without activating a single monster effect can be beneficial, and overall Plunder Patrol's first turn boards can really give this deck fits, as giving your opponent a monster is an effective way to prevent cash tier monsters from summoning themselves to the side of the field. Curly is unfortunately a go touch grass Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, just not consistent enough right now, though I do like the Eevee strategy. Now with the tier limit ban, a lot of players would easily think that dragons would be in the go touch grass or a lot to prove, but fortunately enough, dragons are actually in a really solid spot. I mean, come on guys, it's dragons. This deck normally doesn't go anywhere, as it's a very, very solid pick. And the reason why I think that this deck would be in the Krispy Kreme and Hot and Ready is strictly because hand traps don't affect this deck, while also having the benefit of playing some of the better hand traps to be able to affect most decks. Nibiru and Effect Veiler actually serve as multiple pieces for this deck: chaos space targets, chaos targets, just everything that this deck wants to be able to slow the opponent down while always keeping up with its game plan. It actually has a better matchup against Cash Tira than what you think. Scareclaw, ridiculously slept on, guys. This deck, whether it's a Cash Tira deck or maybe it's a pure deck, it is extremely good. One of the bigger problems that this deck is going to have to play through is Nibiru and hand traps, something that wasn't prevalent inside of the format. But other than that, it's a very, very solid slept on Yu-Gi-Oh deck that can OTK extremely fast and turn off important link monsters. Sky Strikers, I don't think that this is a bad Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Triple Tactics Thrust actually does help this deck a ton, being able to potentially search a Sky Striker Engage or a Triple Tactics talent and put 2 spell cards in the graveyard. The problem with this deck is that while it does have a great grind game, some of the better decks here can just overpower this particular deck. So I don't think you're going to be striking much of the sky if you're playing against one of the better decks and a better competitive player. Spriggans are extremely good and have some of the most busted Yu-Gi-Oh cards. The only unfortunate thing is that they don't have a consistently good inboard. Don't sit here and tell me that the Naturia monster is a good inboard. It's not. Sprite is easily one of the best decks in the room still. Losing Sprite Elf I thought would be the end of this deck's world, but the new Bujin monster definitely helps and allows this deck to continue to play. Spyro got Spiral Resort off the forbidden list, and that might be a lot of hopium for people, but go touch grass. Spyro Master Plan is still banned. Sword Soul is a deck that still has all of the utility and is a very good, safe comfort pick for a lot of players. This deck is a deck that you should pick up if you already know what it's doing, or if you want a very cheap, good budget Yu-Gi-Oh deck to get into the game. It's extremely solid and has some fairly favorable matchups against the meta and hand traps. Tier limits really isn't going anywhere. I expect by the middle of this format, it's probably back in meta changer. Losing all of those cards really didn't mean too much for the strategy. And it's kind of crazy that you think that a forbidden list specifically built to murder tier limits did not murder tier limits. It just goes to show how powerful this deck is. It might be the best deck of all time. Lastly would be Tri-Brigade, which just so happened to have gotten support inside of the set. I would say, any Tri-Brigade variant not Lyrilusk, go touch grass. Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk though, I'd probably say that it's in a lot to prove or slept on. But let's go ahead and see how many people have actually heard my reasoning why Tri-Brigade is right here and who didn't pay attention. It's going to be really, really fun. And that's all that I have for what I think are the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Post the February 13th Forbidden list. Go ahead and let me know, what is your copium take? What do you think I got wrong or right on this Forbidden list? I can't wait to see it. Also, if you think that there's a strategy that I forgot, let me know as well, and I'll try to include it into another tier list. But until then, check out these videos, as I'll catch you on the next one.